Vaccination advocates are calling on the Immigration Minister to deny a visa to a high-profile anti-vaccine activist from the US who was set to tour Australia early this year. Responding to the planned visit, the Australian Medical Association says immunisation is one of the great successes in modern medicine, and objectors who spread misinformation are being reckless. Julie Leask is a social scientist and associate professor at the University of Sydney's School of Public Health. Her research looks at the public beliefs and attitudes around immunisation, and she joins me now in the studio. Thank you for joining us, Julie. Now, this misinformation is fobbed off by the vast majority, but for some it has traction. Who have we identified those groups to be?
You're really looking at the parents who hesitate to vaccinate their children. They're a minority, so it's important to remember that if you take all parents, you've got a spectrum of positions on immunisation, from those who just accept vaccination and go along with it, those who cautiously accept it. Then there are those who are really hesitant and look into it a lot before they decide to vaccinate, or maybe just select out certain vaccines. And then there are the people that decline all vaccines. So those latter groups are actually quite a small set of parents. But it's really important that most parents vaccinate their children so that we don't jeopardise herd immunity.
And while they may be a minority, the conscious objectors, it's quite a different kettle of fish to those who maybe are just lax and don't keep up to date with their immunisation, even though the outcome's the same. But the education campaigns, I imagine, for that latter group is a lot easier than to turn around the beliefs of someone who basically believes it's a conspiracy theory.
That's right. You've got the parents who choose not to vaccinate their kids at all usually have quite strident beliefs, and it's very difficult to change them. And then there's a group of parents who don't vaccinate their kids because they're facing logistical barriers. And so for every person who doesn't vaccinate their kids because they don't accept vaccines, there's one who doesn't vaccinate their kids because they can't access vaccines in a timely way. So we've got to think about those two groups when we're developing strategies to increase vaccination rates.
And the conscious objectors, would you say the hearts are in the right place, but their information is coming from the wrong place? And I imagine it's very much so on the internet.
Yeah, well, all parents want to do the right things by their children. The vast majority do. So what you have is this phenomenon where a very small group of very hyper-vigilant parents are just conscientiously looking into everything to do with their children. And sometimes they may go online and you see a lot of anti-vaccine information online that's put out there by a very small minority of campaigners who are intent on discouraging vaccination. And occasionally parents can be swayed by those views. But I think it's important to remember that in our peer networks, you know, most parents are vaccinating their children, even if they've got genuine concerns. And those concerns, which are, you know, they're right to have. It's right to have concerns about our kids and to be conscientious with our children's health. It's really important that those concerns are addressed in a respectful way that acknowledges the good intent of the majority of parents.
Now, is that where the health industry is up against it? Because anybody can get online and make any sort of claim, but for the health industry to, you know, to rule it out, it's going to take, you know, trials, studies, a lot of money. And in that amount of time that it would take to get there, those beliefs could gain traction in the community. Right,
that's what we saw with the MMR scare in the late 90s that began then in the UK. You saw one, I guess, rogue doctor with an unsupported theory about vaccines that just caught fire. And you watched health officials who had science on their side really struggling to counter the really compelling narratives that those anti-vaccine groups put forward around sort of whistle-blowing, dissent in the ranks, accusing the medical profession of this vast cover-up. It has an almost conspiratorial slant on it. And it can be quite compelling in terms of locating those arguments within those broader social anxieties. So when you're trying to affirm the safety and efficacy of vaccines, you're really up against those compelling narratives. And I think in many ways we need to remind communities of the effects of these diseases. Measles, whooping cough, they can kill.
They certainly can. Julie Leese from the University of Sydney, thank you so much for joining us in the studio.
It's a pleasure.